you think somebody has to be particularly bad in order for one free Western country to sanction that other person in a free Western country, if we're talking about politicians, especially elected politicians who are in the government of a country that you at least publicly consider an ally. Now, there haven't been actual sanctions yet against any member of the Israeli government, but it has been talked about publicly. Um, and yeah, so yeah, you think they're really bad, the people who this is a possibility for, and they are. Yeah, Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's what is it, Homeland Security. I don't remember the exact translation into English of what he does, but um, internal security, whatever. They're pretty bad actors in within Israeli politics, um, within Minister of National Security. Thanks, Daniel. Um, Within Israeli politics, within what they would like the country to become, what an Israel would be like if Smotrich or Ben-Gvir were prime minister with a coalition of the willing, as George W. Bush would call it, a coalition of people who are in agreement with them. I would not want to live in such a country. I would advise anybody who does to leave. Um, that is not why Israel's so-called allies and so-called but no longer pretending to be allies, like in the European Union, are specifically and repeatedly targeting these politicians for criticism and worse for threats of how they might react against the state of Israel if they remain in power, and of course if any of their views are implemented. That what's unique about them is in the context that is in which they're being discussed is the fact that they would like Israel to fight the war against the Palestinians as if it was a war with the intention of winning. Now, I wouldn't say this is really even their policy on that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in this coalition. Otherwise, they would do more to make it happen. But that is essentially the accusation against them. While Israel's allies are telling Israel to deal with the people who slaughtered Israelis on October 7th, who took Israeli hostages on October 7th, deal with them, give them more. If there is no ceasefire and hostage deal, then Israel is at fault, not the people who started this war in the most brutal way imaginable. But yeah, when we hear about Israel, we hear about them being the problem. Of course, we hear about Netanyahu being the problem, but Netanyahu, you would think, is the worst possible person. But then look, Israel actually has worse people. So today we're going to talk a little bit. I've just talked a little bit about the so-called far right in Israel. What is it? What is the West's approach? What should be the West's approach to it? And what does it say about how we deal with politics internally in countries like the United Kingdom and the United States? Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm joined by James Valliant. James, yeah, are you ready to either vote for either of these politicians or impose sanctions on them?
Well, I'm certainly not going to vote for them if I were an Israeli citizen. That's for sure. Any party or group of people who says that Israel should be run, and this is the quote that I recall, Israel should be run just as it was in the days of King David, 3,000 years ago. Anyone who suggests that the Torah should be the basis for constitutional law in Israel, just like the Muslims who advocate Sharia law, mind you, that's the perfect parallel. Now, it's strange if all your criticism is for these guys and not for the entire Muslim world that believes that Sharia law should be the law of their land, which is racially discriminatory, anti-gay, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and on that gay subject, homosexuals have rights, I would remind these men, and ought to have equal rights. The Torah, calls for the execution of homosexuals. So I'm not quite sure how far they would take their position. But, I have to give Netanyahu some credit because in the face of statements like that from the far right, he put the first openly gay Likud member on his cabinet. And so 3 cheers for Netanyahu for, in effect, going right into the face of these people and saying, no, well, even the Likud party will have an openly gay minister. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but
That was in a previous Netanyahu government, right?
uh,
Ben-Gvir and Smotrich weren't there.
that's right. But still, it's in the face of this far right opposition to homosexuality. These parties these are young men, relatively young men, trained as lawyers, but very conservative in their legal and religious views. The things that I think the first one said about Reform Jews is really startling to me. He regards Reform Judaism as not really even being Judaism. They're fake Jews, as he said. That kind of talk, frankly, is exactly what is the caricature of many people who oppose Israel, the nature of Israel. And the conservatives in Israel, I think, should be aware of the fact that their very presence in the government, it creates an ability for Israel's critics abroad to be able to say, yeah, you're a religious theocracy, or at least you want to be a religious theocracy, just like Saudi Arabia or Iran is. And that is not good for Israel. I support Israel not because King David ruled there 3,000 years ago, if he did. It's because today Israel is the only rights respecting, even semi-rights respecting country in the region. It has nothing to do with its grounding in Torah. It has nothing to do. I understand the finance minister is like the son of a 13th generation native of Jerusalem. That tells you just how long Jews have been in Jerusalem, by the way, but that's not the key point. And the key point isn't because he's Jewish, he has a right to live in Judea or Samaria. Now, I'm actually in favor of Israel controlling and occupying that area more than it is now. But it's not his ethnic background, nor is it the ethnic and religious background. It's because I'm an Orthodox Jew or because my family's been there for so many generations. Those are weak arguments. Those are arguments no better than the Arab Muslim fanatics that surround Israel and want all Jews to die. It's the equivalent argument. They're asking for Torah to be, it's a subtle thing. Israel has a much more sophisticated government than most of the other governments around. They accept gay rights to a large extent. And because there's a Supreme Court and a legislature and stuff, but when there's an open issue, when statute doesn't decide it, when the Israeli Constitution doesn't decide it, we want Torah to decide it. And that is a very scary proposition. As I say, it's really no different than Sharia law. And if you're going to be overtly anti-gay like they are, I'm sorry, what you're asking for, if you're going to attack Reform Judaism as not being real Jews, things like that, statements like that, just statements like that make me, obviously I support Israel, but these guys are really the same kind of voice that dominates in the Muslim world. And how I ferociously morally support Israel. These guys are counter to everything that I argue Israel is and ought to be. And if they were to take power, if they were to fully get their policies in, that might cause me to question my support for Israel. Obviously, as I say, there's a legal process in Israel that's much more sophisticated than any of the governments around, and they're asking for these things to happen at the margins of Israeli law and society. But even if it's at the margins of Israeli law and society, these people are collectivist and mystic in their philosophical basis. And as objectivists, we understand that mysticism and collectivism go hand in hand. And all they do is play into the critique that they're really no better than the Islamists who surround them.
Yeah, and the thing to paraphrase Shlomo Shah, Israel's former um, head coach of the national football team in Israel, they are wrong even when they're right. So when they talk about what should be done in the context of war, I agree. Of course, it's very out of context, but I agree. I mean, Smotrich was criticized. I remember by Owen Jones at the time. Owen Jones did a whole video about Smotrich saying there are 2 million Nazis in the West Bank. And he said, Owen Jones said this is genocidal language and so on. He didn't mention what this was in response to, which was the poll that had just come out showing that 75% of people in the West Bank support October 7th. So, there are 2 million Nazis in the West Bank, unless the only challenge to that would be, how many people actually live there? Do we believe the Palestinian numbers of how many people live in the West Bank? That would be the only challenge. But of course, it is a Nazi ideology, and also, let's say, less sophisticated than the Nazi ideology. The Nazi ideology, or at least the Jewish part of the Nazi ideology, as in exterminate the Jews. So. Yeah, in that sense, again, they are right, but they are right for all the wrong reasons when they want to defeat the Palestinians. They want to defeat the Palestinians because not because of the Palestinian approach to life as opposed to the, Tel Aviv approach to life. I guarantee you, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, are not fans of Tel Aviv, and many. I don't know how many of their voters live in Tel Aviv, but those who don't probably talk about Tel Aviv as as people in many other countries talk about the big city where where people kind of make more money and have more stuff.
Where people can be civilized and free, where some
Yeah,
economic development happens, where you can
and
love who you want and
and
live in
and
peace.
even
Yeah.
even in the context of the settlements, look, I have no issue with there being settlements. I certainly think Israel needs to protect the settlements. I don't think there should be any path to a potential Palestinian state at any time, or any type of autonomy for Palestinians in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip ever within our lifetime. So of course, settle there, and do it. But there are people, certainly among the settlers, who are uh, kind of the outposts in settlements, as opposed to the bigger, more established settlements that have been around, in some cases since the late 60s, in some cases like Hebron before the 60s. People are risking their life because they believe the land was granted to them by God. So, I really fear for anybody who is taught by people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, just how to raised by them uh, as humans, because unfortunately they're not living a fully human life. They are living a religious life, like you said. Even while Israel is a free country, people raised in such with such values are in many senses much like the people in Iran. Of course, they have free will, so maybe they can escape, but they are off to a bad start in life.
Between the destruction of Judea by the Romans about 2,000 years ago and the creation of the state of Israel in the late 1940s, Jews have really not had an area of political control. And so we forget because we are used to Christian and Muslim oppression over the last 2,000 years, because those governments have been majority Christian. There have been many majority Christian and Muslim governments in the last 2,000 years. And so when we think of religious oppression in recent centuries, we normally don't think of the Jewish religion. I would simply remind people that, like all other religions, the basis of morality and mysticism leads, as you just pointed out, to an anti-life policy. Blasphemy. What does the Mosaic Law? What does the Torah say about that? You execute them. You stone them. What about uh, any kind of unlawful sex? Again, execution, including gay sex. Does the Mosaic Law endorse slavery? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. If I were to take seriously people who say the Torah should be the law of Israel, then I must presume that Israel would want executions for blasphemy, executions for sex crimes that involved consensual sex between adults. What? Slavery? Slavery? That is all in the Mosaic Law, ladies and gentlemen, along with a whole panoply of animal sacrifices on the correct holy days and so forth, which simply aren't carried out because the temple isn't there. So if you really were advocating a return to Torah, you'd be advocating savage laws, very much like Sharia law. I am a critic of all religions. I'm a critic of religion as such, mysticism as an approach to knowledge, and I'm afraid in every such instance you will find that it destroys morality, a sound morality. Um, all I can say is religious texts, ancient religious texts, cannot be the foundation for any nation, any legitimate nation's laws in the 21st century. No.
So the chat is alive and well, and not just with discussion of PC's adventures in the US, which are interesting. I don't always get to read everything that goes on in the chat, but thank you everybody for engaging. Somebody says you cannot confuse religions. I agree, they're already confused enough as so another commenter says, so you admit Zionism is a gay conspiracy to turn the Middle East gay. Sometimes, James, I worry that people don't hear what we're saying between the lines, but thank you to the commenter.
Okay, you unmasked us. It's a giant conspiracy to fight, and we're going to be so successful in foisting homosexuality on the Middle East, where it's so popular. What? No, I want individuals to have rights. I want people to be free from coercion, so long as they are not violating someone else's rights. And no, I'm not trying to impose any kind of sexual norms on anybody. I'm simply saying individual rights imply freedom, the freedom to act on your own judgment, to act for your own happiness. And religion isn't like that, ladies and gentlemen. All religious ethics are hostile to life on earth. Muslim, Christian, Jewish. You go back to those holy texts, read for yourself. What they have in common makes everything else pale in comparison. All of them would call for violence against their enemies, killing people simply for what they say or draw. But that's what we're talking about. Liberalism, which stands for religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom to act on your own best judgment. That's what civilization is. It's the liberal order of civilization that Israel represents. It's because there are gay bars in Tel Aviv. It's because Arabs have a right if they're citizens of Israel. That is what makes Israel better than all of its neighbors, ladies and gentlemen. To return to some kind of religious foundation is to destroy the legitimacy of Israel, in my mind. Now, as I say, it's on the margins, and they're pushing at the margins, but these are the guys who want to push those margins ever closer to the Torah.
And on a more serious note, somebody says, it seems that Kahanism is still alive in Israel with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and others. Yes, and that is a scary, really scary thing. And like everything you look at, if you look at the Israeli political landscape, is scary because I've seen people who seemingly basically, are somewhat rational, and they look for something, for somebody who says, look, we need to win this war. And the only people who say that are religious zealots, and that is not a good sign for Israel's future. Nobody approaches this from a rational perspective, saying, look, Palestinians weren't, they're not born evil. Jews are not born good. What's good about the Jewish state as opposed to the would-be Palestinian state is that it is pro-life, not in the American political Christian sense of, prioritizing embryos over living humans, but in the pro-humans living their life as humans, whereas the Palestinian society is a pro-death society with nothing to its culture other than the desire to kill everybody of a different of a specific origin. So yeah, as long as you have people on fundamental issues being the same, coming at things with the same approach as the Palestinians have, but just we were born Jews, so we'll be on this side. That is not a good recipe for the future. And if the alternative to that is people on Saturdays in Israel going out to the streets and demanding that Netanyahu capitulate to Hamas more than he already has, then these are your choices if you're in Israeli politics or if you're a voter in Israel. That is terrifying, terrifying stuff.
Terrifying. I can sympathize to some degree. In the United States, if someone complains, for example, about Kamala Harris's price control scheme, they tend to be on the religious right. If they support Israel, they tend to be on the religious right. And this makes it very uncomfortable for me in many contexts. Some of the sounder ideas come from, at least in narrow policy terms. I'm not talking about bigger ideas, but just in terms of policy positions, some of the better policy positions come from the religious right, even in my country too. Although it's just the worst in one sense. It's worse than a Trojan horse. Because what it is it's giving the superficial appearance that it's arguing for the good, but its whole foundation for what is good and for what is right, and why that side, the freedom side, or the side of Israel is right, is completely blurred. The real moral basis for freedom, rights, why Israel is the good guy here and needs defense, they're undermining. They're pulling the rug right from under that. It is a lesser extent that I can share your frustration here in the United States, because we're not right up against Hamas and Hezbollah like Israel is, and that makes it a life and death matter. And so we find ourselves in this curious position where these religious extremists, who I would otherwise disagree with across the board and fundamentally, are the only ones who sometimes advocate the correct military policy towards the West Bank and Gaza. It's a paradox that is uncomfortable that we live with, but that's what makes what we do here at the Ayn Rand Center UK such a value. We're giving you a perspective you won't find anywhere else. It is not traditional right-wing conservative, God, family, tradition, the Bible is the basis conservatism, which is what these guys represent, and nor is it the primordial mysticism and collectivism of the Marxists either, or the intersectional, or whatever they call themselves these days, folks. It is a perspective you will not get anywhere else, a perspective based on reason and individualism and a defense of civilization and liberalism in the true sense. That's the answer, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was younger. I used to I used to see. Okay, I'll read it later if we have time. But there's funny things going in the chat. I used to watch Bill O'Reilly. I'm ashamed to say, and he would read letters at the end, and he would read somebody attacking him from the right and somebody attacking him from the left, and then he would say, "Look, I'm an independent. I get attacked. I'm in the center. I get attacked from both sides." Not everybody knew he was kind of conservative-ish, but. But yeah, he really took great pride in being in the middle. We are not. We reject the spectrum because we think there are two sides of the same coin, and we are trying to offer an alternative there.
Don't confuse the anti-conceptual mentality of Bill O'Reilly, who was what was a populist right-winger nationalist, Christian nationalist. In fact, he kind of anticipated the Trump era of the GOP, frankly, and his bad ideas. No, that is also wrong. It is anti-conceptual, anti-ideas altogether. In fact, if you're in the middle, you must be anti-conceptual like that in the way he does it. But he's really, what it is based on emotion, based on his religious beliefs, by the way. He's a religious conservative.
Yeah. So the person commenting before, I have to read this, and then I'll go to back to Israeli politics. But he said these guys have that gay twinkle in their eyes, and then later says, especially Razi. I mean, this guy's gaydar is yeah.
Twinkle in our eyes. Well, okay, but don't expect me to hit on you
Yeah. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere, and I think this guy.
somewhere.
Um, so a few people in the chat have mentioned Avigdor Lieberman, the Israeli politician, and Naftali Bennett, who was prime minister for a weekend or so. That was more like a year, but yeah. So there are issues with all of them. Lieberman is doing very well in the polls with his party. Bennett is not officially running, but one poll, I think it came out a few days ago, said that if he did, his party would win, like he would get the most seats. Polls that deal with the parties that already exist and we know are going to run show that the Likud under Netanyahu might win, but win in Israel means get the most seats, not get a majority. Nobody's going to get a majority. Nobody has ever in Israeli history gotten a majority. But the interesting thing is, out of the 120 seats, the party that wins in most of these polls gets around 22 seats or so. No party gets 20% of the vote, which shows you how divided Israeli politics is at the moment. There's some suggestion that Bennett and Lieberman join forces into one right-wing party, which I have to say I would vote for, not enthusiastically, but and Gideon Sa'ar might be part of that party, just because of some hope that they might do more. But I would probably lose that hope very quickly, and I wouldn't expect much. Remember, Bennett, when he was prime minister with a very small majority that was basically kept by an anti-Israel Arab party. And Lieberman, he's been in Israeli politics since I can remember following Israeli politics, and he always talks tough. And if he gets a seat in government, he takes it and follows whatever others decide. So Lieberman kind of gained popularity in the last few years because when Israel had election after election, it was his refusal to sit with Netanyahu and his demand that Israel get rid of Netanyahu and claim that that's the only issue that matters in Israeli politics, and a lot of people agreed. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, I would like to see something like that, some sort of secular-like party, although Bennett wears the yarmulke, so I don't know how secular he would be. And but but yeah, there's
Like with
unfortunately.
American politics, I wouldn't let the cross wearing be the determiner. On the other hand, I can't ignore the cross wearing from the American conservative, religious conservative either. So, yes, and they disappoint when they come to power, don't they? I mean, Ayn Rand, when she first wrote about Ronald Reagan way back in the 60s, said, we're so used to being disappointed. I don't want to recommend anyone. And of course, within a few years, she had to say, I denounce Ronald Reagan. And all you have to do is, let someone who might sound better take power, and almost inevitably, we objectivists will end up being terribly disappointed. But I have to agree with you, Razi. Something like that would be probably the best alternative right now.
Yeah, and since we are running out of time, let me just there's one question here. Is it true that Israel wants to invade Africa? Yes, you heard it here first. The plans are put in place. Africa is about to become another colony of Israel. All right, very interesting chat today. Thanks, guys. The reality show starts in a couple minutes. We're going to be talking about the squad, but we're going to be talking about it through a Guardian article, and it's very interesting how they report, what they don't report. I know we do that frequently, but anyway, it's believe me, it's worth watching. Something else we do frequently, maybe not frequently enough, is talk about Candace Owens. James and I will be talking about her tomorrow. And yeah, we actually have a more organized schedule this week than usual. So in the next day or so, you will hear more or less everything we're planning to do. Of course, events could preempt anything we plan. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you on the reality show in a couple of minutes.
Be safe.